start by, telling us, how this idea came to you and what is the plan to make this video series?
Sure. I think I just want to sort of pick up on your point first about marketing. And I think the marketing generally is what I would call sort of maintenance marketing, that it's keeping the sort of the current group or community of people who already know about Build a DAO up to date with what's going on. Mm-hmm. So any updates, rather than thinking, okay, who's our market? Who are the next sort of cohort of users? Where are they? What do they want to do? And how do we reach them? And that was really the sort of the roots of where this idea came from. I arrived at Build a DAO, I think about 6 months ago. I thought I'd been working in quite a few other DAOs. I'm a filmmaker. I've been a filmmaker for a long time. I generally work with organizations of lots of different sizes, from sort of the big mega brands like Google and Microsoft and Virgin and Red Bull, through to museums and individual artists and cultural organizations to sort of tell their stories using video and VR and interactive media. And I've slowly been, over the last couple of years, moving more and more into Web3, not in such as making films for Web3 organizations, but just in terms of, using it as a different sort of realm to work in. And I've been working with DAOs for, I guess, a couple of years on and off, and found Builder, and I thought I was fascinated, and to me it sort of sits in between Nouns and Zora, bringing in sort of the best infrastructure of both, and it's just in this really powerful position. And clearly in the first year some amazing things have been done, lots of learning, lots of building, but it just seemed to me that when I asked around a lot of other people I was working with, whether they were developers or founders or builders or artists, they kind of heard of Builder, but they didn't really know what the story was, and they certainly didn't know the opportunity that was on offer. And then I sort of had this sort of moment. It was on Zora, when you click the little plus button to create something, this menu pops up, and it's, single edition, multi-edition, drop, and then at the bottom it has this mysterious button called DAO. And it was the first time I'd seen, that ability to launch a DAO actually bundled in the same place as creating a collection. And that was a kind of a penny drop moment for me, because I realized that I think that Builder is like a sort of sleeping giant, and as soon as the penny drops of the opportunity here for all types of different individuals or communities or businesses to use the infrastructure to coordinate around ideas or missions or whatever it may be, then I think people are going to realise that what the opportunity sort of lies here. So, I guess at the root of everything I do, I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. And when I find something interesting, I just follow it, because I just can't, if there's a story not being told, I find it almost physically painful. And I felt that this was something that, I could really contribute to the DAO. I'm not a developer. But this is my skill, and it was something that I saw, a very good reason for putting this proposal forward, because I saw that there was a gap, and I thought that the fact that it was the first anniversary coming up on the 15th of November, that this was actually a really good time to make that proposal, and it syncs perfectly that if the proposal is approved, we can get our first highlight film out and release it on the first anniversary. And that film will be essentially the idea is to create kind of a sub-brand called Builders Original. originals. The concept of originals is well known to people. You know, there's Netflix originals, there's Prime originals, there's Zora originals. So the originals is a kind of a catch-all word for, you know, a series, a themed series, I guess. So within that, this proposal has three parts. There's a 60-second promo film, which will release on the 1-year anniversary, and that will essentially take the entire year and compress it down, all of the highlights, everything that's been achieved by the DAO and the DAOs that have launched from it, put that into a sort of a 60-second piece, which is essentially the kind of the film that is supposed to grab people's interest, because it's not something that is going to feature lots of screenshots. It's not a how-to video. It's basically, it'll be incredibly varied in terms of, we'll be gathering footage from all of the DAOs, and they've all done, extraordinary things, and putting that into a short 60-second piece with this sort of provocation at the end of it. Once the viewer's seen this kind of dynamic journey through an entire year of building and proposals and creative work, that it just says at the end, what could you build? And that's and that's something that film can really be used anywhere. We'll obviously minted on Zora, and that will be us, I guess, as planting our flag in the ground of saying, this is what we're about to do. We're releasing these films, but we'll also it can be used in any sense. When anyone wants to know what Builder is, rather than going, well, look at the website, or, trawl through all of the different things that have been done, or read the newsletter, or, which is what people would expect, you can just direct them to the film. So that's the first film, which I guess is it's an emotional piece. Is to pick there essentially to capture people's attention. It's not information based. It's more of a celebration of what's been done over the year and showing the audience what that is. And I think it'll actually be quite surprising to everyone, because even though most of the members of the DAO, do understand what all of the other DAOs do, they don't necessarily know what all the proposals have delivered. There's no obviously there's the Notion page, which goes through all of the proposals, which is interesting once you start digging into it. But I think having that sort of visual piece is going to be really interesting for everyone involved. Then the second piece goes into a lot more detail. That's more of a short documentary format.
Sorry, I think I lost my internet connection for a few seconds.
Oh, okay. Would you like me to repeat something for you? No, we're good. Okay. So the second film is a 5-minute documentary piece, and that will go into a lot more detail. So we'll do interviews with all of the DAO members who want to be involved, all of the key players. We'll split the film into essentially 3 acts. Every good story comes in 3 acts. We'll start with the origin and the sort of the guiding mission that started the DAO. We'll then go into a little bit more detail about what all of the successes, what has been achieved, and I guess this will then add detail to all of the visuals that people have seen in the original film. So this is really sort of what's been done over that year, all of the things that have been built, the reasoning behind it, and it's essentially allowing DAO members to tell their own stories about the last year and about their personal mission and their personal vision. My job is then to not so much to tell the story, but to organise what they tell me into a narrative. And then the last part of the film, the third act, is very much about the long-term vision. the opportunity that people see, going forward, and the type of work that's being done now, because obviously there's a lot of building going on now, where that's going, what that will do, what the new features will enable people to do. And that's essentially the sort of I guess the main information film. And again, that will be minted on Zora, can be used on all social media channels and provided to people who need more information. So it's not necessarily the film that will capture people's attention, but once we have their attention, this is the film that will then explain more detail of what the opportunity is, what the mission is, what the vision is. And then we have 7 very sort of short 60 to 90 second pieces, which will be DAO profiles. And these will be interviews with key members of the DAO, along with visuals that represent that DAO. Now, clearly, that's going to be very different from DAO to DAO. And when we begin to collect all of the content that they have, or indeed don't have, then we'll create a sort of a visual style for each of those films. So we'll end up with 7 films that tell sort of past, present, and future in a very quick sort of bite-sized pieces of what each DAO does, how they do it, why they do it, what their challenges are, what their successes have been. So all in all, we have this kind of, I guess, a pyramid-shaped campaign with the short film, the 60-second piece at the beginning, which pulls people in, the documentary that sits in the middle, which tells them more information about the mission, what's been built, and where we're going, and then the individual films about each DAO, which goes into more of the operational kind of details, and of course can also be used by each of those DAOs for their own needs as well. So that's the kind of the concept of the campaign, and all of these films will be released under the sort of banner of Builder Originals, which will be branded using the Builder DAO art pack. So there's sort of consistency across the whole thing.
I think this is was a fast-moving promotional video, and then once we get people's attention, we show them more details, and eventually we sort of showcase some of our best DAOs and to let them know what is going on in each of those Builder DAOs. So I think this is a very well-designed structure. And can you also talk a bit about sort of in terms of the process, how are you going to make the film? What sort of interviews are you going to do? And what other kind of work, will go into the making of this set of films?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the process is I'm not coming in and going, I want to make this film. The first step is really to listen to members of the DAO, what story they think needs to be told. So the first step is research, which will be interviews, which will just be audio interviews, where we'll go through, discuss what they think, what they want to discuss, investigate their story. I'll have a bunch of questions which will be similar for everyone, and then a bunch of questions which will be different for everyone. And from that, the idea is that we gather an archive of interviews, which I can then use to piece together the story. What we'll also do is, because obviously this research is actually very useful to everyone, to other teams as well. And, we're obviously very, very open to sharing these interviews with anyone else in the DAO that needs that information or needs to gather research for their own proposals or for their own work. Because obviously if we're doing a round of interviews with all of the DAO members, we want to try and get as much out of those interviews as we possibly can to use in as many different ways. And part of that is that all of the interviews and all of the content that I gather, that I get sent from all of the other DAOs, will be put into an online archive, which will be accessible for anyone in the DAO that needs it, which will be a really useful resource. So once we've done the interviews, which will be audio and done on whatever platforms that we think are best, and the other step is obviously gathering all of the content. Some DAOs will have a lot more video content than others, which is fine. And again, once I've seen all that, I begin to put together a visual style for the documentary. The visual style of the short 60-second piece will kind of be dictated by the footage, but it'll be very fast-paced, not screen-based, perhaps a little unusual. And once all that's put together, I start going into the production and editing process. The first film will deliver, which will be before the anniversary. That will be the first one. The process, we need to set up a process for approvals and feedback on the edits. Generally, the best way of doing this is to set up a small group, like an editorial board, who can handle the that process. The worst thing that can happen generally with feeding back on films is to post it on the DAO and ask everyone what they think. That's generally a way for everyone to go insane, because you just end up with no film because everyone has a completely different point of view. So we need to sort of organise a way for people to consolidate feedback. And then I will take that feedback, make the changes, and we generally do sort of 2 rounds of feedback. The first one, which is where everyone or the board get a chance to make sort of any big changes and amends. We do that, and then there's sort of final tweaks before we finish the films off. And those are generally that's the process we go through with all of the films. And it should be noted that anyone who agrees to participate in the film has full editorial control over their own contribution. So if someone's in a film and they say, I don't like that piece, I'd rather that wasn't in there, it comes out. So everyone has full editorial control over their own contribution. Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, fantastic.
Hey.
Good. Okay, final. Yeah, great. So I guess that was a sign that we should go touch some grass. Yeah, but I'm very glad that you're back.
I have no idea how much of.
I think I heard most of the things about process, and then I think you cut off right before you were about to talk about the timeline.
Oh yeah, okay. So timeline. As I said before, we're going to deliver the first film, the kind of a 60-second promo, so that it's ready for release on the 15th of November, on the anniversary. The documentary will then go into post-production after that, which will probably take a few weeks. So I would suspect that would be beginning of December. And then we'd look to, unless there's a good reason not to, we'd look to get the other films finished by mid-December, or just certainly before Christmas. And the only reason I say unless there's a good reason not to, if there's something clearly that it looks to be happening in January that might really be important to get into one of the DAO films, then we can wait a little bit to make sure we do that. So obviously I can be flexible about that, depending on what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember I think it was Neil Cry or Zach asked about the distribution. in Discord. I remember you answered in great details, but for those who haven't dig into that Discord thread, could you sort of summarize what is the distribution plan for the films?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I thought I told you that, but I think I was just talking to my phone. Obviously the first step would be if we can, get some place on the Zora front page for Builder Originals, then that would be amazing, because we'll be releasing all of the films on chain. Mm-hmm. And clearly they will be great assets for social media for Farcaster, for Twitter, and can sit on YouTube, so they can be accessed at any point. I think it would be very useful to have some form of documentation where we can add the type of assets that people can use when they are perhaps going on Twitter Spaces or podcasts. And I think a link to the film is a really useful way of engaging podcast and Spaces audiences beyond just that moment. Mm-hmm. Because if someone sees a link for a video, and they know through the discussions there's a 1-minute video that sums up a year, then the chances are they will click on that rather than perhaps reading something or scanning through a website. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an asset. And of course, the individual films can be used as assets by the each individual DAO in whatever way they see fit. So, I mean, that's the kind of the standard distribution, I guess, that we would expect with most forms of content. Mm-hmm. But I think with a video, especially when it's the first one we release, and there's not that much type of content like that. Obviously, Nouns release huge numbers of videos, but they're generally, cartoony. They're not information films. They're not something that really explains to you very much about Nouns. So I think something like this is a great asset to use in any way like that. And then we'll be the documentary. I'll be entering into a lot of independent global film festivals, specifically ones that attract sort of aligned audiences. So ones like sort of South by Southwest, those kind of things, the Rain Dance, Slam Dance. Also, we'll be looking at some of the smaller festivals that cover the subjects of art, culture and technology. And also be very interested in developing a plan to see how we can get the film shown at relevant crypto conferences over 2024 as well, because I think that would be, and I think the IRL kind of campaign allows us to sort of move outside of the current community that most of our communication goes to, and even if it's not particularly focused, it does take our message outside of that space, which I think is very, very important. So that's essentially the distribution sort of concept. But mm-hmm. There are people in the DAO who are far more qualified than I am to come up with ways to get the films out there. I generally, my part of this sort of equation is to create the films, tell the stories. There are people who are far more qualified than I am to come up with great ways to get that in front of people and to measure the success of it as well.
Mm-hmm. And then do you imagine doing some sort of proposal with the video content, proposal directly from the Builder DAO?
Yes, there was the original idea when I first sort of drafted it up did contain an idea to essentially to start a sub-DAO which would handle mm-hmm. production and then charge the DAO a percentage for handling that production. Usually agencies will charge a 20% production fee for producing something. Mm-hmm. And the idea being that we could sort of start a sort of an independent DAO that would then not have to rely on Builder as much in the future for any sort of comms expense. there was the feedback. Obviously, at the moment, we have to be quite tight with our budget. So the feedback was that that was something I needed to concentrate on, is to bring the actual ask down a bit. So I sort of put to the side the concept of the DAO and the production fee. But there was also an idea in there for a proposal, which I also put to the side. But those two ideas still are there and still are very valuable. And I think once we get to the end of this campaign and we can then analyse what worked, try and identify anything that didn't, gauge the opinion of the DAO, then it was certainly something that I'd like to look at to launch, if there's an appetite for it and it makes business sense, is to launch this concept of Builder Originals DAO. One for anything that Builder DAO requires, but also looking at ways to become more of a like a service DAO for the whole sort of ecosystem as well, because everyone needs to tell their story, and it could be a way to become a lot more self-sufficient and to allow members to then actually propose directly to that DAO, which would take the financial burden off of Builder. So that's certainly something I think's worth looking at, but I think it's probably a good idea in terms of budget and timeline and everything to concentrate on this sort of pyramid structure of this film, and then look back at that afterwards and see whether that's something that we want to go forward with. The idea for the proposal was, because obviously we're going to have a lot of content, a lot of which, and the difficult part of editing is that you always have to cut out a lot of really great material. So what I was thinking of doing is to do like a sort of a generative video drop, whereby you could essentially generate randomized stories from different interview content. So you could have maybe 50 pieces of dialogue that suggest the beginning, 50 a middle, and 50 an end. Then you would randomly generate a video from those elements, which could then almost act as a kind of an inspiration for a different story. Because what's interesting is when you put diverse elements together, the way that our brain works with stories like that is you begin to sort of extract different stories that maybe you wouldn't see before. And that's certainly something that I think is worth looking at. But I took it out of this proposal simply because I thought it was more important as a first proposal like this to do something that was more focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And once we have the films out there, it's also easier for people to accept the idea of a sub-DAO that can be more, as I said, self-sufficient. Because I do think that a lot of stories in the ecosystem, the Nouns Builder ecosystem, Nouns ecosystem, Forecaster ecosystem, and then beyond, there's so many stories so many stories need to be told, and there are a lot of good materials out there, but someone to pick them up and then weave all of them into something that can be easily understood and distributed. Right? So I guess this is really an area that we need to do better. In the last several minutes, I really want to talk a bit about sort of your previous background. I know you have alluded to earlier about the fact that you have worked with a lot of large brands or organizations to make films, but could you also touch a bit on your sort of crypto journey and how you sort of got into the Nanish ecosystem, and sure. also talk, so basically talk about the things that you mentioned in a proposal, but probably in greater detail.
Sure. Yeah. As I said, I've been a filmmaker for a long time. I've always been really interested in tech and especially new tech. And I discovered Bitcoin in 2013 and then sort of bounced in and out of crypto, I guess, until 2018 and went through the whole ICO lunacy. Then I started a VR company which at the time was great. And then I heard about CryptoKitties, but then thought I don't get it. Why is Gavin? Because I've always been interested in digital art, and it was only when I sort of discovered art blocks that the penny dropped. And this was back in the time when sort of curated collections were like 0.1 ETH, and you could go back the next day and half of them would still be there. So I sort of jumped into that, and then essentially just disappeared down the rabbit hole, as everyone tends to. And then I think it was about 8 or 9 months later, I kind of looked at this collection and just thought, if I were to sell all of these, culture and everything that comes with it, it had me. And I thought, if I sell all of these this work, then I can probably take 9 months off, reinvest it in sort of the next wave, which is what I did. It was a particularly painful process, and but then I did. I took actually about 8 or 9 months off, and just jumped in and learned a lot about DAOs just by getting involved, as everyone does. And then I got with essentially the function of then beginning to start a new business that had everything I knew about storytelling and filmmaking, with everything that I learned about Web3, and I had sort of 3 thesis based that I was going to base that around. And then I stumbled onto an extraordinary project. It was someone I met owned a house in a small seaside town in Great Yarmouth, in which is in London, in England, and it had a Banksy, one of the best preserved Banksies in the world, on the side. So he was just about to cut it out the wall and sell it. So I persuaded him not to, and then we embarked on a project to turn. Essentially, to start a community to buy the house, turn it into a sort of artist residency for the world's best street artists to come to the town, and to help transform this sleepy old seaside town on the eastern border of England into a sort of globally recognised street art capital. So it was a huge project, and there we had investors lined up, and it all looked great. And then, of course, Terra Luna happened, and then all of the dominoes fell, and I just ended up chasing the market down to zero, trying to change the model. So we've now put that got put to one side. And I was always fascinated by nouns. It was for all of the same reasons everyone is. I don't actually remember how I discovered Builder, but I realized when I sort of got this was definitely something new. And when you sort of feel, it wasn't so much I felt at home, but I felt like I was suddenly in the right place, that there was something happening here that I didn't quite understand, but that I knew it was actually quite powerful. And then the longer I sort of hung around, then, story, and probably somewhere I want to spend some time, which is how I got to the point where I thought I would like to step up and see if I could help with this proposal.